Hi guys, take a look at these two clips right here. One was shot with a typical photo lens, a spherical lens, and the other was shot with an anamorphic lens. Now obviously there are differences between these two clips, but one thing that is similar is that they are both being shot using autofocus, and that is a new thing. We need to talk about it. Quite recently, two lens manufacturers have started making anamorphic autofocus lenses, and that is very exciting to a person like me because nobody wants to shoot with me. I'm always by myself, so I rely very heavily on autofocus to film my old mug. And even when I'm behind the camera, I still like having the option of autofocus. It really makes my workflow a whole lot easier. Now, the two companies are Blazar and Sirui. We'll be focusing on Sirui for this video because that is the lens I have here, and they have also sponsored this video. And even though they've sponsored the video, I actually have some criticisms that I will levy to the Sirui company because they have been really good at taking feedback and applying it either in firmware updates or in the next iteration of lenses. So I won't hold back on my criticisms while I display what this lens can do for you and whether or not this lens is suitable for you at its pretty relatively affordable price point. When you consider what anamorphic lenses often cost, this is really quite a good bargain if it's a lens that suits you. Or maybe you'll just be better off with a regular old spherical lens. So let's get into all of it. First, a brief overview of the build quality, and I actually think this is a beautiful lens to look at. It is built really well. I love the feel of it because it is a metal lens, but it's actually not that heavy. It is not a huge lens in terms of anamorphics, and it's only 629 grams. And since this is designated a Super 35 lens, you will be using it on your APS-C cameras, and I think it fits very nicely. It fits perfectly on my FX30. It also suits it with that little bit of blue strip around there. Has a very smooth turning focus ring as well as an aperture ring that can be clicked or declicked. And you see the big grooves in the two rings. So if you wanted to connect some focus motors to it, then you could do that right there. It also has an autofocus lock button and an autofocus to manual focus switch, which of course is quite unique when it comes to anamorphic lenses. It is a 1.33 times squeeze anamorphic. It has a 77mm filter thread, a minimum focus distance of 60 centimeters, and if you look at the lens element itself, you will see that oval anamorphic shape inside instead of the circular spherical type. The lens has a USB-C port at the back for firmware updates, and it has some weather sealing for dust and moisture resistance. It is a 40mm focal length, which to me is just about perfect for shooting video with an anamorphic lens. I always choose around this type of focal length when I'm shooting video with an anamorphic lens. And surprisingly, it has a T1.8. I say surprisingly because at this price, to let in that much light, I think is really great. You can get a nice background separation if you're wide open, or it can be very good in low light environments. I took it out into the mean streets of Toronto in the nighttime, walking around, filming my shots, and everything came out nice and clean without any noise because I was able to use it down at T1.8. But let's talk about the character of this lens because that is why a lot of people would buy an anamorphic, to get that anamorphic look to their footage. It does look different than a spherical lens with that push and pull that you see between the subject that is in focus versus the out of focus backgrounds. When you squeeze it and then de-squeeze it in post, it is going to look different. Now, this lens does have a strange type of out of focus background when it comes to anamorphic, specific to this Sirui lens. Now, it looks more like a hexagon as opposed to an oval traditional shape of anamorphic bokeh. I use the Sigma 30mm to give a roughly equivalent field of view when you factor in the aspect ratio. You can see how much more round the bokeh balls are on the Sigma lens, whereas the Sirui has more of that hexagon shape, and it does go a little bit oval as you stop it down, so it certainly does look different than the Sigma bokeh. Another reason people often look at anamorphic lenses is for the unique lens flares that you can get out of them. Now, Sirui offers a blue lens flare or a white lens flare. I have the blue lens flare. When you compare it to the Sigma lens, you can definitely see that difference in lens flare, a long blue streak on the Sirui as as well as a larger lens flare element floating around the screen as I move the light. Now, I personally love that type of flare. Maybe it's because I'm used to Hollywood movies where you see it all the time, blue streaks or white streaks going across bright lights in cinema productions. So that is something that a lot of people really look for when they grab a lens like this. Now, of course, I should talk about the autofocus because that is the headline feature of this particular lens. Now, I am using the Sony cameras with the E-mount version of this lens, and I'm happy to say the autofocus worked quite well. It kept me all the time. It never lost me as long as I wasn't on the very, very edge of the frame. And that makes a lot of sense because anamorphic lenses get quite soft at the edges and quite stretched out. So I wouldn't expect it to keep focus on the very edge of the frame. But as long as you're somewhere near a reasonable center of the frame, you stay in focus. I used it for a live stream, an entire hour-and-a-half live stream. It never lost me. It didn't have any trouble with autofocus in any situation that I put it in, even in low light situations. Now you will notice here some focus breathing, and I certainly expected that with a lower priced anamorphic lens, but bear that in mind if you plan to do a lot of very fast focus pulls from close to far away, then you're going to have to deal with that. However, here comes one of the major criticisms that I have for this lens, and that is this autofocus is extremely noisy. I am on the latest firmware update, but the autofocus motors, they really grind. It can be pretty distracting, and if you have a shotgun mic on top of your camera, you are 100% going to ruin your audio if this lens is focusing. Let me show you. Now that may not be an issue depending on how you're using this lens. If you have a boom pole way over by your talent and you're using that and you're just using this lens on the camera without audio, not an issue at all. But hopefully firmware updates will come that will make this a more quiet and smooth autofocusing system because it does work well, just really noisy. The other criticism I have with this lens I have alluded to earlier in the video, and that's with the character of this lens itself in terms of anamorphic character. The bokeh balls being hexagon shape, that is not my favorite. I would prefer the traditional oval type shape bokeh. And in terms of distortion, while there's not much distortion on this lens itself, the distortion it has is pin cushion, which makes it look a little less like your traditional anamorphics that often have more of a barrel distortion. So the subject that you have in focus with the barrel distortion is kind of coming at you. So it gives you more of a 3D look, whereas when you have a pin cushion, then the subject is kind of going away from it and the background is coming forward. Of course, you can do little corrections in post, but if I am erring on the side of which distortion I would pick the barrel distortion, and maybe that's just because that's what I'm used to. Maybe you have a different opinion and you prefer a little bit of pin cushion distortion as opposed to barrel distortion. The price of this lens is coming in at $799. If I have any coupon codes, I will put them down below in the description, but $799 USD I think is a very reasonable price for an autofocus anamorphic lens. Even if it was not autofocus, it's still a reasonable price for an anamorphic lens. It is, of course, a first generation autofocus anamorphic lens, so I do expect with firmware updates there will be improvements, as well as when new versions of these lenses come out, they will be even better. It's a very exciting time. If you like the look of anamorphic, not quite as clinical and sharp as something like a spherical lens, then this really may suit you. But of course, you can take a spherical lens, as I did here. I think this lens is about $300 USD, this Sigma 30mm 1.4, and then just crop the top and bottom, and then you will have that same aspect ratio. You will, however, not get the anamorphic characters or the anamorphic light flares. So let me know down below, is this something you are interested in? Are you as excited as I am that autofocus is coming to anamorphic lenses? Let me know what you think, and we'll have a nice little discussion about it. Hey, thanks for watching this. We'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.